I never imagined my perfect life would crumble in the blink of an eye. But there I was, standing at the door of the luxurious hotel where Pedro and I were supposed to celebrate our wedding anniversary. The air was thick with a strange perfume, mixed with the scent of betrayal I still couldn't name. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs, eager to surprise him with a bottle of wine and a smile that hid the weariness of an exhausting day at work. But as I approached the room, I heard muffled laughter, familiar voices that froze me in place. I pushed the door open slowly, and the world stopped. There was Pedro, my husband of 5 years, entwined in the arms of my own sister, Carla. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me, but it was too late. The searing pain in my chest suffocated me, as if an invisible knife had been plunged into my heart. How could they do this? Carla, the sister I'd protected since childhood, betraying me with the man I swore to love forever. Hot tears streamed down my face as I backed away, the room spinning around me. In that moment, the trust we'd built shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. I ran, the echo of my own soles hitting the floor, a cruel reminder of the loneliness that awaited me. The betrayal wasn't just an act. It was the end of everything I knew. Returning home that fateful night, I felt like a ghost wandering empty streets, the cold wind biting my skin like silent accusations. Pedro tried to call countless times, but I ignored him, my phone vibrating like poison in my pocket. At home, I rummaged through drawers and cabinets, searching for clues I had blindly ignored. Old messages, deleted photos, lies that accumulated like dust under the carpet. Carla, always envious of my success and happiness, had infiltrated my marriage like a sly serpent. I remembered the nights she would visit our house, pretending to be the loving sister, while exchanging knowing glances with Pedro. Indignation grew within me, a boiling rage threatening to explode. How naive had I been? I, Elisangela, the strong woman who had built an enviable career at the tech company, had been reduced to a victim of a family conspiracy. Confronting Pedro was inevitable. I waited for him to arrive, my fists clenched, ready to unleash all the pent-up fury. When he entered, with flimsy excuses on his lips, I stared at him coldly, demanding the naked truth. He confessed everything: the clandestine meetings, the promises of eternal love for Carla. My stomach churned, and I threw him out of the house, locking the door behind him as if sealing a tomb. In that dark solitude, I swore I wouldn't let myself be destroyed. Betrayal was the fuel for something greater. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions, with the initial shock giving way to profound sadness, like an ocean slowly swallowing me. I could barely eat or sleep, reliving the scene in the hotel like a horror movie playing on loop in my mind. Carla tried to justify herself through text messages, claiming that love just happened. But her words sounded hollow, full of disguised selfishness. My mother, upon finding out, was silent at first, her eyes filled with a pain I didn't fully understand. Pedro, the man I loved, was revealed to be a coward, begging for forgiveness while planning to run away with my sister. The humiliation was now public. Friends whispered, neighbors looked on with pity. I isolated myself, locked in my room, crying for entire nights, questioning my worth as a woman and a wife. But between the tears, a spark of anger ignited. Why should I suffer alone? They laughed as I crumbled. I decided to investigate further, accessing emails and shared accounts, uncovering months of orchestrated lies. Each discovery was a blow, but also a shield forming around me. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, cold, cruel. In that abyss of pain, I began planning my exit, consulting lawyers in secret, preparing the groundwork for the divorce that would take them by surprise. The confrontation with Carla was the culmination of my initial torment, a meeting laden with accusations and unshed tears. I invited her to a neutral coffee, away from prying eyes, but the air between us was electric, ready to explode. She arrived with a victimized air, her eyes downcast, murmuring apologies that sounded rehearsed. "It was a mistake, sis," she said, but I could see the falseness in her smile. I stared at her, describing every detail I'd seen at the hotel, forcing her to relive her own shame. Pedro was the prize she'd coveted since we were teenagers, envious of my stable life as she bounced from job to job. Anger bubbled as I listed the betrayals. The parties she'd concocted to get close to him, the deleted messages I'd recovered. Carla cried, but her tears seemed theatrical, lacking genuine remorse. I stood, declaring our sisterhood dead, severed like a rotten bond. Leaving there, the weight on my chest eased slightly. The exposed betrayal was the first step toward freedom. Pedro, in turn, bombarded my phone with empty promises, but I blocked him, silencing his voice forever. At that point, the pain turned to determination. I would no longer be the naive victim. Reflecting on the uncovered betrayal, I realized how the signs had been there all along, ignored by blind love and excessive trust. Pedro and Carla, united by envy and forbidden desire, plotted in the shadows while I built our future. My mother, ever observant, called that week, her voice trembling with indignation, promising that justice would come from where it was least expected. I felt betrayed not only by my husband and sister, but by the family that had allowed this to blossom. The hotel, once a symbol of romance, was now a landmark of ruin. I began to reorganize my life, changing locks, canceling joint accounts, preparing for divorce like a sharp weapon. Sadness still visited me at night, but anger fought it, forging a new Elisangela. True friends supported me, sharing similar stories, reinforcing that I was not alone. Pedro tried to reconcile through intermediaries, but I ignored them, focusing on healing. Carla disappeared temporarily, likely secretly rejoicing. But I knew this was only the beginning. Betrayal had planted seeds of revenge that would eventually germinate. In the mirror, I saw a broken but resilient woman, ready to turn the page. The discovery wasn't the end. It was the catalyst for something epic. After the betrayal at the hotel, I knew I could no longer share my life with Pedro. The decision to file for divorce was like lifting a weight off my chest, but each step was a battle against pain and anger. I hired a relentless lawyer, Dr. Mariana, known for her unwavering commitment to infidelity. Our first meeting was a relief. She listened to my story with attentive eyes, promising that Pedro would not get away with it. I began gathering evidence, recovered messages, bank statements showing suspicious hotel expenses, and gifts I never received. Each document was a stab in the back, but also a brick in the wall I was building against him. I blocked Pedro on all social media, cutting off any chance of manipulation. My house, once a home, was now a battleground where I planned my exit. The loneliness was suffocating, but determination kept me going. My mother, still processing Carla's betrayal, called me daily, offering silent support. I refused to speak to anyone in the family who tried to defend Pedro or Carla. The lawyer advised me to act quickly, before he could hide assets or make up stories. Divorce wasn't just the end of the marriage. It was the beginning of my revenge. The divorce process was like walking on hot coals. Pedro, upon receiving the notice, tried to contact me through mutual friends, claiming regret, but I knew it was just desperation. He hadn't expected me to act so quickly, that the understanding woman he knew would transform into someone so resolute. Dr. Mariana was relentless, demanding a fair division of assets and exposing Pedro's secret spending on Carla. I discovered he was using our money to finance expensive dinners and trips disguised as work. The humiliation of learning this in detail was crushing, but it also fueled my resolve. Each meeting with the lawyer was a reminder that I was regaining control. Meanwhile, Carla withdrew, probably thinking she would emerge unscathed. My mother, strangely quiet, simply said, "Let time take care of them." I temporarily moved to a smaller apartment, far from the memories of the home I had built with Pedro. The silence of the new house was oppressive, but also liberating. I blocked all contact with the family who insisted on resolving things. My only goal was to close this chapter and ensure Pedro paid for what he did, even if only financially. The initial divorce hearing was a spectacle of tension. Pedro appeared with a mediocre lawyer, trying to paint a victim image, claiming that mistakes happen. But Dr. Mariana dismantled his lies with the evidence we collected, emails, receipts, even a message mocking my trust. The judge, a woman with a piercing gaze, seemed to sense my pain through the documents. I stood my ground, even when Pedro tried to look at me with pleading eyes. My anger was a controlled fire, channeled into every word my lawyer uttered. The initial agreement guaranteed me the majority of our joint assets, including the house, which I planned to sell. Pedro was visibly shaken, realizing his comfortable life was crumbling. Outside the courtroom, he tried to speak to me, but I ignored him, leaving with my head held high. My mother met me in the parking lot, hugging me tightly, whispering that the worst is over. But I knew it wasn't the end. The betrayal still burned, and I wanted more than a legal victory. Cutting ties with Pedro was like amputating a part of myself, but it was necessary to survive. With each step, I felt stronger, more myself. With the divorce underway, I began rebuilding my routine, but the shadow of betrayal still lingered. My co-workers, who knew about the scandal, treated me with a mixture of pity and admiration. I threw myself into my work, leading projects at the tech company where Pedro and I worked. It was ironic. He, a mid-level manager, always bragged, while I, a senior analyst, did the heavy lifting. Now, I used my position to stand out, ensuring my value was recognized. Meanwhile, Pedro tried to keep up appearances at the office, but I could hear the whispers from his colleagues. Blocking him out in the workplace was harder. We shared meetings and projects, but I maintained a cool head, treating him like a stranger. My mother, increasingly enigmatic, began sending messages suggesting that big things were coming. I didn't understand, but I trusted her. The divorce progressed, and each signature on the papers was a small victory. Carla, for her part, disappeared completely, probably living with Pedro somewhere. The thought of them together still hurt, but I channeled the pain into action. Divorce was my liberation, but justice was yet to come. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a bittersweet relief. The house, the assets, everything was in my name, but the victory felt hollow without true justice. Pedro lost so much. The car, the joint bank account, and most of all, his facade of being the perfect man. I learned that he and Carla were living together, trying to build a new life. The thought turned my stomach, but I refused to give in to the sadness. My mother, always a pillar, encouraged me to focus on myself, promising that fate would take care of the rest. I distanced myself from my family, except her, unable to forgive those who knew of the betrayal and remained silent. At work, my dedication earned me a promotion, a slap in the face to Pedro, who watched my success while his career stagnated. Blocking them both from my life was like closing a door to the past. But, inside me, the flame of revenge still burned. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done, not only in material losses, but in their souls. The divorce was only the first act. The stage was set for something bigger, something I hadn't even imagined. My mother, with her wise gaze, seemed to know exactly what was coming. 3 years had passed since that devastating night in the hotel, and I, Elisangela, had rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal. The divorce had freed me, but the scars still throbbed at unexpected moments, like a distant echo of pain. I dedicated myself to my work with ferocity, rising through the ranks of the tech company to become a senior manager, overseeing teams that Pedro had once led. My new home was a sanctuary of peace, decorated with personal touches that screamed independence. True friends surrounded me, and I even began dating casually, testing the waters of trust again. But contact with family was minimal. I had distanced myself from everyone except my mother, who had become my silent anchor. She called me sporadically, updating me on trivia, but never mentioning Pedro or Carla. Until one day, her voice on the phone carried a mysterious tone. "They're getting married, daughter. Pedro and Carla. And I want you to come to the wedding. Not to forgive, but to see something interesting." My heart raced. The thought of seeing them again filled me with nausea, but the curiosity her promise instilled was irresistible. What was she planning? 3 years of silence, and now this? I hesitated, but accepted, feeling an urgency building within me. The wedding would be the stage for something unpredictable, and I was ready to witness it. In the months leading up to the wedding, I prepared mentally, reliving old memories to strengthen my emotional armor. 3 years had transformed me. From a victim to an empowered woman with a professional network Pedro would envy. My mother, ever enigmatic, sent short messages, assuring me that everything was under control. I discreetly investigated. Pedro and Carla were living a false life of luxury, financed by debts I learned about through mutual friends. They announced their engagement on social media, posing as the perfect couple, which made me laugh bitterly. Blocked for years, I saw everything through fake profiles, nursing a pent-up rage. My mother's invitation arrived in the mail, elegant and formal, but with a handwritten note. "Come alone. Trust me." The urgency in her handwriting intrigued me. What did she know that I didn't? I dressed for the event like a dethroned queen returning to the throne, choosing a dress that exuded confidence. The flight to my hometown was tense, memories of betrayal invading my mind like ghosts. Upon arrival, my mother greeted me with a tight hug, her eyes shining with a secret. "You'll understand soon," she whispered. 3 years of waiting had culminated in this, and the suspense consumed me. The wedding day dawned sunny, in stark contrast to the emotional storm I was feeling. 3 years after the betrayal, I stepped into the church where Pedro and I had married, now decorated for his union with Carla. Guests whispered at the sight of me, surprised by my presence, but I kept my head held high, ignoring the stares. My mother, sitting beside me, clutched my hand tightly, her face a mask of serenity. Pedro, at the altar, looked nervous, avoiding my gaze, while Carla paraded in a white dress that screamed hypocrisy. The ceremony began, the priest speaking of eternal love, words that sounded like mockery to me. My mother stood up suddenly, interrupting Pedro's "I do," announcing she had something to share. Silence fell like a guillotine. All eyes turned to her. "Before you seal this," she said, "let's reminisce about the past." The urgency in her voice was palpable, as if time were running out for a revelation. I held my breath, my heart pounding. 3 years of secret planning? What came next took me by surprise, but I felt justice was finally coming. As the ceremony paused, my mother activated a hidden projector, and slides began to appear on the church wall, recounting my story with Pedro. 3 years of pent-up anger exploded there, in old photos of us happy, contrasted with evidence of the betrayal. Guests gasped, murmuring in shock, while Pedro paled, his fake smile fading. Carla, frozen at the altar, tried to interrupt, but my mother continued, her voice firm. "Did you think you could erase what you did?" The urgency of the situation grew. The priest tried to intervene, but the slides continued, exposing messages and dates that proved the infidelity. I watched, a mixture of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. My mother had secretly collected everything, weaponizing pain. Pedro begged her to stop, but it was too late. Public humiliation was inevitable. Carla wept, her makeup smeared, as guests left, outraged. 3 years later, the invitation to see something interesting proved to be a brilliant trap. My mother, the unexpected vigilante, had orchestrated this with precision. Chaos ensued, and I felt alive, ready for the next act of sweet revenge. After the shocking revelation, the wedding dissolved into chaos, with Pedro and Carla fleeing to the jeers of the remaining guests. 3 years of my mother's silence culminated in a collective catharsis. She later explained that she had discovered the betrayal early and bided her time. "Justice takes time, but it comes," she said, her eyes brimming with pride. I hugged her, grateful for her unexpected loyalty. The news spread like wildfire, tarnishing their reputation in their hometown. I returned home with a sense of partial closure, but knowing more would come. At work, rumors swirled, and I plotted my own coup. 3 years had taught me patience. Now it was time to act. My mother became my confidant, sharing details she had kept hidden. Pedro and Carla, humiliated, tried to pull themselves together, but the damage was irreparable. The urgency to rebuild my life intensified, fueled by this victory. Looking back, I saw how time had healed wounds, paving the way for overcoming them. The invitation to the wedding was not just a trap for them, but a liberation for me. 3 years later, I was ready to shine. Pedro and Carla's wedding was about to become the most talked about event in town, but not for the reasons they imagined. 3 years after the betrayal, I sat in the packed church, the air heavy with the scent of fake flowers and hypocrisy. My mother beside me seemed calm, but her fingers drummed on the pew, a sign of restrained urgency. The priest began the ceremony, speaking of eternal union, while Pedro sweated at the altar, avoiding my piercing gaze. Carla, in her immaculate white gown, smiled as if nothing had happened, oblivious to the pain she had caused. Suddenly, my mother stood, interrupting the vows, and announced firmly, "Before you continue, there is a story everyone needs to know." The silence fell like a heavy curtain. Guests looked at each other in confusion. She activated a projector hidden behind the altar, and the first slide appeared, a photo of Pedro and me at our wedding, radiant with happiness. Murmurs grew louder as more images emerged. Our happy moments contrasted with dates of betrayal. The revelation was meticulous, slides showing messages exchanged between Pedro and Carla, irrefutable evidence my mother had secretly collected. Pedro paled, stammering objections, but it was too late. Fear settled in his eyes. Carla, petrified, watched her dream publicly crumble. The urgency of the situation made hearts race. No one expected this dramatic turn of events. As the slides continued, the church transformed into a makeshift courtroom, with my mother as the ruthless judge. Each image was a stab, photos of the hotel where I'd caught them, deleted emails she'd recovered with the help of a private investigator. "You betrayed not only Elisangela, but the entire family," she declared, her voice echoing off the sacred walls. Guests gasped, some laughing nervously, others leaving indignantly. Pedro tried to turn off the projector, but a family friend stopped him, forcing him to face the humiliation. Carla was crying now, her makeup running, begging to stop, but my mother continued, revealing how they'd used my money to finance their affair. The twist was poetic. The place where Pedro had sworn eternal love to me now exposed its falsehood. I watched in silence, a dark satisfaction growing within me, mingled with sadness for what we'd lost. The urgency grew with each slide. The stunned priest tried to restore order, but chaos had already ensued. Pedro begged his guests for forgiveness, but his eyes betrayed genuine panic. Carla, once arrogant, shrank, realizing her victory was illusory. My mother, with surgical precision, concluded the presentation with a current photo of me, smiling and successful, contrasting with their ruin. The revelation wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice served cold. The climax of the revelation came when my mother recounted the most intimate details, her voice thick with maternal indignation. Slides showed timelines, dates when Pedro lied about work trips, actually dates with Carla. "They laughed behind her back," she accused, pointing at me in the audience. The fear in Pedro's eyes was palpable. He trembled, knowing his reputation was in tatters. Carla, trying to defend herself, shouted that it was true love, but the guests booed, sympathetic to my exposed pain. The urgency of the interrupted ceremony created an electric suspense. What would happen now? My mother paused, letting the silence amplify the impact, then displayed the final slide, a message from Carla mocking my naivete. Nervous laughter turned to murmurs of disgust. Pedro fell to his knees, begging her to stop, but it was useless. The truth was laid bare for all to see. I stood slowly, walking to the altar amidst stunned gazes, and stared at them both. "You reap what you sow." The turn of events had caught them off guard, turning the wedding into a spectacle of downfall. My mother, exhausted but triumphant, turned off the projector, declaring, "Now, proceed if you dare." The drama unfolded like a movie, with them as the exposed villains. After the performance, chaos descended on the church, with guests debating loudly, cell phones recording the scandal. Pedro, panicked, tried to calm Carla, who was sobbing uncontrollably, her dress now a symbol of shame. My mother, steadfast as a rock, faced accusations of sabotage, but replied, "Sabotage? That's true, and truth hurts." The revelation exposed not only the betrayal but their lack of remorse over the years. I felt a profound catharsis, seeing their fear mirror my own 3 years ago. The urge to escape grew. Pedro and Carla fled through the side door, pursued by camera flashes. Guests surrounded me, offering condolences and admiration for my mother's courage. "She planned this for years," I whispered to a distant aunt, still processing the shock. The meticulously prepared slides even included recovered audio of conversations, played softly to emphasize the cruelty. Carla, once envious, now saw her rise publicly crumble. Pedro, the confident man, was reduced to a whimpering coward. The turnaround was complete. The marriage, instead of a union, had become an early divorce. My mother hugged me, whispering, "Justice for you, daughter." The drama culminated in triumph, but the show wasn't over yet. Reflecting on the wedding revelation, I realized how my mother had transformed pain into power, exposing Pedro and Carla to the world. 3 years of secret planning culminated in slides that unmasked their deceit, leaving them naked before society. Their fear was delicious. Pedro, sweating cold, watched his perfect image crumble, while Carla collapsed in fake tears. The urgency of the interrupted ceremony had accelerated the inevitable. Guests cancelled receptions, families split. I discreetly recorded everything, knowing I would use it at work, amplifying the revenge. My mother, the unexpected heroine, confessed that she had discovered the betrayal early and waited for the perfect moment. "They thought they would get away with it," she said, eyes shining. The turn of events wasn't violent, but devastating, a poetic justice that humiliated them where it hurt most, their pride. Pedro and Carla left that moment destroyed, their marriage aborted like a rotten dream. I felt free, ready for the next step. The revelation was the turning point. Now, they would reap the consequences. My mother and I walked away with our heads held high, leaving behind the chaos they deserved. The drama would continue, but I was in control. After the shocking revelation of the slides in the church, the public confrontation exploded like a bomb, turning the wedding into a courtroom of accusations. My mother, still standing at the altar, pointed her finger at Pedro and Carla, her thunderous voice echoing off the walls. "You not only betrayed my daughter, but you spat in the face of the entire family." Guests froze in their seats, eyes wide, as Pedro tried to hide behind the priest, sweat streaming down his face. Carla, her veil now askew, stammered incoherent apologies, but my mother didn't stop, highlighting every detail of their lack of remorse. 3 years without a genuine apology, without a shred of respect for the pain they caused, she screamed, listing the lies they spread throughout the town, pretending the affair was fate. The fear in Pedro's eyes was visceral. He begged the guests to ignore it, but murmurs of disgust grew louder. Carla cried hysterically, trying to hug Pedro, but he pushed her away, embarrassed. The urgency of the moment was palpable. The priest tried to intervene, but my mother continued, explaining how they had used Elisangela's absence to plan this. I watched from the audience, my heart racing, feeling a dark justice unfold. Guests began to boo, turning the event into chaos. The confrontation wasn't just verbal. It was a naked exposure of their wickedness. The confrontation escalated when my mother called impromptu witnesses from among the guests, people who knew about the betrayal but remained silent. "You saw it and did nothing," she accused, pointing to uncles and cousins who now hung their heads in shame. Pedro, cornered, tried to defend himself. "It was a mistake from the past." But my mother retorted furiously, "Mistake? You laughed while she suffered, without any regret." She emphasized the lack of respect, recalling how Carla, my sister, had ignored birthdays and family holidays after the betrayal, cutting ties as if I were the problem. Carla, sobbing, begged, "Mom, please." But her maternal tone had turned steely. "You lost the right to call me Mom when you stabbed your sister." Pedro's panic intensified. He saw allies turning their backs, guests leaving en masse. The turnaround was complete. The wedding, a symbol of a new beginning, had become their public end. I stood up, joining my mother at the altar, and faced them both. "You reap what you sow without mercy." The urgency grew as cell phones recorded, sending the scandal viral. My mother concluded, "No respect for family, no forgiveness." The public confrontation unmasked them, leaving them naked before everyone. At the height of the confrontation, my mother reeled off a litany of accusations, each more cutting than the last, highlighting Pedro and Carla's persistent cowardice. You never repented. Instead, you planned this as if Elisangela didn't exist, she roared, her voice echoing like a verdict. Guests murmured agreement, some applauding her courage. Pedro, trembling, tried to counter, "This is revenge." But my mother laughed coldly. "Revenge? This is justice for years of disrespect." She laid out the details. How Pedro had used divorce proceeds to buy Carla's engagement ring, without a penny of remorse. Carla, cowering, wept, "I love you, Mom." But the contempt was evident. Love? You traded family for lust. Their fear was palpable. Pedro was sweating profusely. Carla clutched her dress as a shield. The urgency of the chaos accelerated. The priest declared the ceremony cancelled, guests debating loudly. I intervened, my voice firm. "You humiliated me in secret. Now feel the public." The turnaround caught them. Once arrogant, they now begged for belated mercy. My mother concluded, "A lack of repentance condemns you." The public confrontation was cathartic, a release of years of pent-up pain. As the confrontation unfolded, guests split into factions, some defending Pedro and Carla out of pity, but most condemning their lack of respect. My mother, implacable, countered objections. Pity? Where was the pity when they were cheating in secret? She highlighted the lack of remorse, citing messages where they mocked my post-divorce recovery. Pedro, in despair, fell to his knees. "Sorry, mother-in-law." But she ignored him. "Mother-in-law? You lost that by sleeping with my other daughter." Carla tried to flee, but guests blocked her, forcing her to confront her. The panic in their eyes was delicious. They saw reputations crumble in real time. The urgency increased with sirens in the distance. Had someone called the police? No, it was just the noise of the spreading scandal. I discreetly recorded, capturing each accusation for future use. My mother turned to the guests. "See what cheating causes. Destruction without remorse." The turnaround was poetic. The altar of love became a stage for judgment. Pedro and Carla, humiliated, ran away, booed. The public confrontation didn't end there. Echoes would reverberate throughout the city, scarring them forever. Reflecting on the public confrontation, I saw how my mother had turned the wedding into an arena for justice, accusing Pedro and Carla of a complete lack of remorse and respect. Her every word was a blade, cutting through their facade before everyone. The fear she instilled in them was deserved. Pedro, once confident, crumbled, while Carla saw her envy exposed. Shocked guests spread the news, amplifying the humiliation. The urgency of the moment had culminated in controlled chaos, with my mother in command. "Justice does not forgive disrespect," she said afterward, hugging me. The turn of events had left them with no way out. No marriage, no dignity. I felt vindicated, ready to extend that to work. The confrontation was the family climax, highlighting inevitable consequences. Pedro and Carla were reaping the storm. My mother, the vigilante, had proven unwavering loyalty. 3 years of waiting had paid off. Now, the world knew the truth. The public drama was liberating, paving the way for my new beginning. After the public confrontation at the wedding, I knew justice was not yet complete. Pedro and Carla had suffered humiliation, but I wanted them to feel the consequences where it hurt most, in their professional pride. As a senior manager at the technology company where Pedro and I worked, I had growing influence, while he, a mid-level manager, struggled to maintain relevance. During a crucial presentation to the board, with directors and colleagues gathered, I saw the perfect opportunity. 3 years after the betrayal, I carried an ace in the hole. The audio recording of the wedding confrontation, discreetly captured on my cell phone. Before the meeting, I edited the audio to highlight my mother's accusations, Pedro's confession, and Carla's sobs, exposing her lack of remorse. With my heart racing, I began my presentation about a strategic project, but at the end, I changed my tone. Before I close, I want to share something personal that affects our corporate ethics. I turned on the audio on the room's sound system, and my mother's voice echoed, recounting the betrayal. The shocked silence of my colleagues was palpable. Pedro, present in the room, went white as a sheet, fear etched on his face. The urgency of the revelation was electrifying. I was turning the tables on the professional stage, where he thought he was untouchable. As the audio played, detailing Pedro's betrayal of Carla, the directors exchanged incredulous looks, and colleagues whispered in astonishment. I strategically paused the audio just as my mother accused Pedro of using company resources to finance the affair, such as trips disguised as work. "This isn't just personal," I declared firmly. "It's a matter of professional integrity." Pedro tried to stand up, stammering, "This is out of context." But the chairman cut him off, demanding silence. The fear in his eyes grew. He knew his career was at stake. The turn of events was devastating. The man who had boasted of his position was now being judged by his peers. I continued, explaining how the betrayal had affected my initial performance, but that I had overcome it, while Pedro abused the company's trust. The audio ended with Carla pleading, reinforcing her guilt. The urgency of the situation was clear. Colleagues who had once respected him now regarded him with contempt. I handed the board a dossier of corporate emails confirming the improper spending. The room erupted in murmurs, and Pedro, humiliated, had no defense. My revenge on the company wasn't just personal. It was a message of consequences. The impact of the audio was immediate. The board adjourned the meeting to discuss it privately, but the disapproving looks Pedro received were undeniable. He tried to confront me in the hallway after the presentation, whispering, "You're destroying my life." But I coldly replied, "You destroyed yours when you cheated on me." The urgency of the moment drove me. I knew the board wouldn't ignore the evidence. Colleagues, who had previously whispered about my divorce, now congratulated me on my courage, some confessing they'd been suspicious of Pedro for years. The dossier I submitted included financial details. Airline tickets purchased with a corporate card, expensive dinners disguised as meetings. Pedro's fear was tangible. He knew his career, already stagnant, was at risk of collapse. The turnaround at the company was poetic. The environment where he'd felt superior now condemned him. I received supportive messages from colleagues, reinforcing my position. The board called Pedro into a closed meeting, and rumors swirled that he would face sanctions. My mother, upon hearing this, laughed over the phone. "You learned well, daughter." Revenge on the company was my final move, ensuring that Pedro would pay where he was most proud. Days after the presentation, the atmosphere at the company was tense, with Pedro visibly isolated. Colleagues avoided him, and he barely showed up at meetings, likely fearing further exposure. The board, after reviewing the dossier, called an internal hearing, where Pedro had to explain each suspicious expense. I wasn't present, but I heard he stammered, unable to justify the overwhelming evidence. Fear consumed him. Colleagues reported that he seemed shrunken, far from the arrogant man he once was. My about face had completely unmasked him, showing that his betrayal was not only personal, but professional. The urgency to act quickly worked in my favor. The board wanted to protect the company's reputation, and I had become indispensable, leading high-impact projects. Meanwhile, I received praise for my ethics, ironically highlighted by Pedro's exposure. My mother visited me proudly. "You used the truth as a weapon, just as I did in the marriage." The revenge at the company was calculated, not violent, but sharp, destroying Pedro's facade. Rumors of his possible transfer or dismissal were circulating, and I knew the next step was inevitable. Justice, slowly but surely, was sealing his fate. Reflecting on the revenge at the company, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but not without a touch of melancholy. 3 years after the betrayal, exposing Pedro in the environment he considered his kingdom was cathartic. The audio, combined with the dossier, not only revealed his lack of ethics but also reinforced my strength in the eyes of everyone. The fear in his eyes during the presentation was proof that he was reaping what he had sown. The urgency to act in the meeting was crucial. Any hesitation would have weakened the impact. My mother, my inspiration, applauded my strategy, saying that the truth always wins. The turnaround at the company wasn't just about Pedro. It was about reclaiming my power, showing that I wasn't the fragile victim he imagined. Colleagues saw me as a leader, while Pedro became a pariah. The revenge was sweet but strategic, ensuring his downfall was public and professional. The board still deliberated, but Pedro's fate was sealed. I felt free, ready for the next chapter, while he faced the consequences of his arrogance. Justice, as my mother had promised, had arrived with force. Revenge at the company was only the beginning of Pedro's decline, whose arrogance finally caught up with him. After the devastating presentation, where I exposed his misappropriated spending and betrayal, the company's board acted swiftly. In a closed meeting, they decided to transfer him to a remote post in a secondary branch, a meaningless position in a small, isolated town. The fear in his eyes when he received the news, reported by colleagues, was almost tangible. He knew this was one step away from dismissal. Pedro, who once boasted of connections and status, now faced the humiliation of being relegated to a forgotten corner of the company. I, on the other hand, was officially promoted to executive manager, taking on projects he dreamed of leading. The turnaround was poetic. The man who betrayed and underestimated me was now reaping professional irrelevance. The urgency of the board's decision reflected the desire to protect the company's reputation, and I had become an indispensable pillar. Colleagues commented on how quickly he had fallen from a confident manager to a shunned employee. My mother, upon hearing this, laughed. He dug his own grave. Pedro's downfall was a reminder that arrogance has a price, and I was just beginning to see the spectacle. In the days following the transfer, Pedro tried to keep up appearances, sending formal emails and showing up at virtual meetings with a forced smile. But the atmosphere at the company had changed. He was a pariah, shunned even by former allies. The fear of losing everything consumed him, and rumors had it he was begging the board for a second chance, to no avail. The professional upheaval hit him where it hurt most. His identity was tied to status, and now he had nothing. I, meanwhile, led with confidence, receiving praise for my competence and ethics. The dossier I submitted to the board, with evidence of his improper expenses, sealed his fate. I learned he tried to blame Carla, claiming she influenced him, but the board didn't buy his excuses. The urgency of the situation pressed on him. Each day at the remote branch was a reminder of his downfall. Colleagues who had once fawned over him now sought me out to congratulate him, some confessing they had always been suspicious of his conduct. My mother called me proudly, "You showed me who's boss." Pedro's downfall wasn't just professional. It was the destruction of his facade, and I watched with restrained satisfaction. The remote branch where Pedro was sent was a logistical nightmare, a poorly equipped office, with low-priority projects and an unmotivated team. He, who had prided himself on skyscraper meetings, now juggled spreadsheets in a cramped cubicle. The fear of being fired loomed large. Colleagues reported he seemed paranoid, obsessively checking email, expecting an imminent dismissal. The turn of events was cruel but deserved. He had used the company to fund his betrayal, and now he was paying the price. I, on the other hand, was flourishing, leading a multi-million-dollar project that put my name on the radar of the global board. The urgency of his downfall contrasted with my rise. While he sank, I soared. Pedro tried contacting me via corporate email, asking to talk, but I ignored him, letting the silence speak for me. My mother, ever my compass, suggested I focus on the future. He's already lost everything that mattered. The board, rumor had it, was planning to review his contract, with dismissal a real possibility. Pedro's downfall was a public spectacle, and for the first time in years, I felt the power to control my narrative. He reaped what he sowed, and I was free to shine. Pedro's humiliation intensified when news of his transfer leaked to the local press, with headlines highlighting "Manager demoted after scandal." Fear of total exposure consumed him. He avoided social media, knowing that the cancelled wedding and his professional downfall would go viral. The turnaround was relentless. The man who had ridiculed me was now a laughingstock. At headquarters, my reputation only grew. Colleagues saw me as a symbol of resilience, while Pedro was a warning about ethics. The urgency of his situation worsened. I learned that he had tried to negotiate with the board, offering to resign to avoid a public dismissal, but the decision was out of his hands. My mother, visiting, brought news. Pedro was living isolated in the small town, without friends or support. "He lost everything," she said, a gleam of righteousness in her eyes. I remained focused, leading meetings with confidence. while he struggled to remain relevant. Pedro's downfall was more than professional. It was existential, dismantling the ego that sustained him. Every step I took upward was a mirror of his defeat, and I savored the irony. Reflecting on Pedro's downfall, I saw how justice unfolded with precision. 3 years after the betrayal, he was no longer the arrogant man who had betrayed me. He was a shadow, trapped in an irrelevant position, with his dismissal imminent. The fear that consumed him was the same I felt upon discovering his betrayal, but now I was in command. The professional upheaval had disarmed him, exposing his fragility to everyone. My rise, on the other hand, was proof that pain can be transformed into power. The urgency of his downfall contrasted with my strategic patience. My every move, from the audio recording to the dossier, was calculated to ensure his downfall. My mother, my greatest ally, celebrated. "You beat him where he thought he was untouchable." The board, according to sources, planned to terminate his contract, citing lack of trust. Pedro had reaped the storm he had sown, and I, finally, felt the lightness of victory. His downfall was the penultimate act. Now Carla's fate awaited, and I knew that justice would not stop. With Pedro mired in his professional decline, the focus now turned to Carla, my sister who had once stabbed me in the back. After the fiasco of the cancelled wedding and the public humiliation, she tried to cling to Pedro, but the news of his transfer to a remote position was the last straw. I learned from acquaintances that Carla, realizing Pedro was no longer the prize she imagined, abandoned him without ceremony. The fear of being tied to a man in decline made her act quickly. She left Pedro for another, a supposedly charming businessman who promised the life of luxury she had always envied. But the twist was lurking. This new partner, Ricardo, was a debt-ridden con artist, living off appearances and loans. Carla, blinded by ambition, didn't see the signs. While I consolidated my position in the company, she jumped from one mistake to another, believing she would escape the consequences. The urgency of her decision betrayed her. Without Pedro, she needed a new savior, but she chose poorly. My mother, ever attentive, updated me with a tone of irony. She thought she could escape justice. Carla's abandonment was the beginning of her own downfall, and I watched, knowing that fate was only beginning to exact its toll. Pedro's abandonment by Carla was swift and cruel, as if she hadn't invested years in the betrayal. Mutual friends said she left him in a public argument, accusing him of ruining her life with his fall. The fear of losing status consumed her. Carla, who had always envied my success, now saw her world crumble. Ricardo, her new partner, seemed perfect. Expensive car, dinners at fancy restaurants, promises of travel. But the twist came quickly. He was drowning in debt, using Carla to keep up appearances while dodging creditors. She, dazzled, ignored the signs, bounced checks, strange phone calls at night. I, meanwhile, flourished, leading projects at the company and rebuilding my life with confidence. The urgency of her new choice blinded her. Carla wanted to erase the past, but fate doesn't forgive so easily. My mother, with her sharp instincts, laughed on the phone. She traded a traitor for a con man. Pedro's abandonment was only the first blow. Carla now faced the consequences of her greed, and I knew her downfall would be as public as his. Justice, slowly but surely, was closing in around her. As Carla sank into her new, illusory life, the truth about Ricardo came to light. He'd convinced her to invest in a promising business, draining the savings she'd accumulated with Pedro. Fear began to set in when the first creditors knocked on her door, demanding payments that Ricardo swore he'd take care of. The twist was cruel. Carla, who had betrayed me out of envy, was now a victim of her own ambition. I learned from a cousin that she tried to maintain a facade, posting happy photos on social media, but her puffy eyes betrayed her desperation. I, on the other hand, was receiving awards at the company, my story of overcoming obstacles inspiring colleagues. The urgency of Carla's situation grew. Without Pedro and with Ricardo exploiting her, she was cornered. My mother, ever vigilant, sent me a clipping from a local newspaper. Ricardo was being investigated for fraud, and Carla was appearing as his partner. The irony was delicious. She, who had mocked my pain, now faced public humiliation. Pedro's abandonment left her vulnerable, and her choice of Ricardo sealed her downfall. I watched from afar, knowing that justice didn't need my hand to act. Carla's life was rapidly falling apart. Ricardo, cornered by creditors, disappeared, leaving her with debts and a rented apartment she couldn't afford. The fear of losing everything forced her to work 2 jobs, a store clerk by day, a waitress at a corner bar by night. The woman who dreamed of luxury now struggled to survive, exhausted and humiliated. The upheaval was relentless. Carla, who had called me naive years ago, was now reaping the fruits of her arrogance. I, meanwhile, was buying a new apartment, a symbol of my independence. My mother, visiting me, brought gossip. Carla had tried to ask her family for help, but everyone rejected her, reminding her of her betrayal. The urgency of her situation was clear. Without support, she sank into despair. On social media, her posts stopped, replaced by embarrassed silence. I felt no pity, only justice. Pedro's abandonment was her attempt to escape, but she chose the wrong path. My mother, with a wise smile, said, "She dug this hole herself." Carla's fall was the echo of my pain, now reversed into inevitable consequences. Reflecting on Carla's abandonment, I saw how her choices had led to her downfall. 3 years after betraying me, she was alone, without Pedro, without Ricardo, without status. The fear that consumed her was the same I felt upon discovering her betrayal, but now I was on top, while she crawled. The turnaround was poetic. The envious sister, who dreamed of stealing my life, was now living on crumbs. The urgency of her downfall came from her own greed, choosing a con man rather than confronting her actions. My mother, my ally, celebrated, "Justice always finds a way." I felt free, knowing that Carla was reaping what she sowed. Her attempt to escape the past only sank her deeper. At work, I shone, while she struggled in precarious jobs. Pedro's abandonment was the trigger. Ricardo, the final blow. Her story was a warning. Betrayal and envy take their toll. I now looked to the future, ready for the final act in this saga of justice. The final consequences for Pedro and Carla were like the inevitable outcome of a tragedy foretold, with every treacherous action coming back to haunt them. Left without support, Carla, once full of herself and envious, now struggled to survive in a world she herself had poisoned. Working 2 grueling jobs, daytime in a department store, running from shelf to shelf, and nighttime as a waitress in a crowded bar, cleaning tables until the wee hours, she felt the weight of loneliness and fatigue. The fear of not being able to pay the bills consumed her, turning nights into sleepless nights filled with belated regret. Pedro, in turn, lost all the status and professional prestige he had so valued, reduced to a common employee in the remote branch, where insignificant projects made him question his own competence. The turnaround was complete. The man who had seen himself as a winner was now ignored by former colleagues, his career in ruins. I, Elisangela, watched from afar, through rumors and my mother's updates, feeling a dark justice taking hold. The urgency of their declining lives contrasted with my growing stability. As they sank, I soared. My mother, with her wisdom, would comment, "Actions come back like boomerangs." The consequences were not just financial. They were emotional, corroding their souls day after day. Carla begged distant relatives for help, but doors closed, echoing her own betrayal. Pedro, isolated, watched his pride crumble, with no one to blame but himself. Without family or social support, Carla faced the harsh reality of a life without a safety net, working tirelessly in jobs that barely paid the rent. Her days began at dawn, rushing to the store where she served impatient customers, and ended late at night, with aching feet at the bar, serving drinks to strangers. The fear of falling into deeper debt forced her to save every penny, living on simple meals and worn-out clothes. Pedro, meanwhile, lost the prestige that defined him, his transfer becoming a veiled dismissal. The board ultimately dismissed him, citing ethical incompatibility. He now sought menial jobs, sending out resumes that no one responded to, his reputation tarnished by the scandal. The turn of events united them in misery. Carla, who dreamed of luxury, now counted pennies. Pedro, the ambitious one, was rejected in interviews. I felt cathartic knowing this. my life blossoming with new friends and professional opportunities. The urgency of their daily struggles was palpable. Carla cried alone at night, questioning past choices, while Pedro drank to forget. My mother, always the guiding light, told me, "They reap what they sow, without mercy." The eventual consequences mirrored my initial pain, now inverted. Without support, they crumbled, while I rebuilt with renewed strength. The consequences intensified, with Carla trapped in a grueling two-job routine, with no time to dream or rest. She, who had betrayed me out of envy, now envied ordinary lives, watching friends thrive while she stagnated. The fear of becoming ill from stress haunted her, but quitting was not an option. Ricardo's debts still haunted her. Pedro, having lost all prestige, drifted through temporary jobs, as a salesperson in a small store, far from the corporate glamour. His official dismissal came as a final blow, with reference letters denied by the company. The upheaval was relentless. Both, once united by betrayal, now separated and broken. I, on the other hand, was celebrating a promotion, leading a talented team, and traveling to conferences. The urgency of her downfalls accelerated. Carla tried to reconcile with her family, but was met with coldness, echoing her lack of remorse. Pedro isolated himself, avoiding old contacts, his ego in tatters. My mother proudly shared, "Justice does not forget." The ultimate consequences weren't external punishments, but internal ones, the weight of guilt and loss eating away at them. Without support, they faced the void they'd created, while I embraced the abundance of resilience. Without any support, Carla sank deeper into precarious survival, alternating between jobs that drained her energy and dignity. Working overtime to cover rent and food, she felt her body weaken, but her fear of the streets kept her going. Pedro, stripped of status, accepted menial jobs as a delivery man, where no one recognized him as the manager he once was. His prestige had evaporated, with professional networks ignoring him, sealing his irrelevance. The upheaval transformed them into shadows of their former selves. Carla, the ambitious one, now humble. Pedro, the confident one, now doubtful. I watched with a mixture of relief and reflection, my rising career taking me to new horizons. The urgency of their realities contrasted with my tranquility. Carla called acquaintances asking for loans, but was denied, reminding me of her betrayal. Pedro drank alone, reliving mistakes in mental loops. My mother, my confidant, would say, "The consequences come to everyone." They were multifaceted: financial, emotional, and social loss, a cycle of pain they initiated. Without support, they paid the price, while I, free, planned a bright future, knowing that justice prevailed. Reflecting on the ultimate consequences, I saw how Pedro and Carla reaped the bitter fruit of their actions, with no escape. Carla, without support, worked tirelessly at 2 jobs to survive, her life a stark contrast to the envy that had driven her. Pedro, stripped of status and prestige, faced constant rejection, his career in permanent ruins. The fear that consumed them was the echo of my initial pain, now multiplied. The turnaround was perfect. Traitors united, now isolated in misery. The urgency of their downfalls had taught me valuable lessons about resilience. My mother wisely concluded, "Evil returns to those who do it." The consequences were not my revenge, but the universe's, balancing the scales. Without support, they crumbled, while I rose, ready for a new beginning. Their story was a warning. Betrayal exacts a heavy price, and justice, though slow, is inexorable. I felt at peace, knowing the cycle was closing. After the devastating consequences that befell Pedro and Carla, I, Elisangela, finally felt the freedom to breathe without the weight of betrayal. 3 years after that fateful day at the hotel, I saw myself not as a victim, but as the protagonist of my own story. My career at the tech company was flourishing, with a recent promotion that placed me as one of the most respected leaders in the industry. Outside of work, I rebuilt my social life, surrounded by loyal friends who celebrated my resilience. The urge to leave the past behind drove me. Each day was a chance to create new memories, free from the shadow of Pedro and Carla. My mother, my greatest ally, became even closer, sharing laughter and plans for the future. "You won, daughter," she would say proudly as we ate dinner in my new apartment, decorated in vibrant colors that reflected my renewal. The turnaround was complete. I had not only survived the betrayal but had transformed it into fuel for success. The fear that once consumed me now belonged to them, while I embraced trust. Justice, served with precision, allowed me to look forward, free to begin again. Each step was proof that pain can be transformed into power, and I was ready to live fully. My new beginning wasn't just professional. It was personal, emotional, almost spiritual. After years of carrying the pain of betrayal, I allowed myself to explore new horizons. I began traveling alone, discovering cities I'd always wanted to visit, each adventure a reminder of my independence. The urge to live for myself grew. I signed up for painting classes, something I'd abandoned in my youth, and found joy in creating. In love, I opened up slowly, dating people who respected my story, unhurried to commit. The turnaround was evident. The woman Pedro and Carla had humiliated now shone, confident and whole. My mother, ever present, encouraged me to dream big, sharing stories of her own overcoming. "You are stronger than you think," she would say as we planned a trip together. The past, with its betrayal and suffering, seemed distant, like a movie I'd seen but never experienced. The fear of being betrayed again still lingered on lonely nights, but I faced it, knowing I deserved happiness. My new beginning was a blank canvas, and I held the brush, ready to paint a vibrant future, without the shadows of Pedro or Carla. As I built this new chapter, news about Pedro and Carla came like echoes from a resolved past. I learned that Carla remained trapped in her 2 jobs, exhausted and without prospects, while Pedro, unemployed, lived off odd jobs, far from the status he so cherished. The upheaval in my life contrasted with their downfalls. I traveled to international conferences while they struggled to pay the bills. The urgency to move forward kept me focused. There was no room for resentment, only for growth. My mother, my compass, reminded me, "You don't have to look back. The future is yours." At work, I led with empathy, inspiring my team with my story of overcoming adversity. New friends surrounded me, and old family bonds, like those with my mother, strengthened. The fear of failure that once paralyzed me was now just a whisper, muffled by the confidence I had built. I began supporting local causes, donating time to help women experiencing betrayal, transforming my pain into purpose. My new beginning wasn't just about me. It was about inspiring others to rise again. Justice, already served, gave me peace to fly. My new beginning took shape in moments both small and large. A promotion that led me to lead a global project, a trip to Italy where I walked alone through vineyards, and nights of laughter with friends who became family. The urgency to live fully guided me. I didn't want to waste another day with regrets. My mother, ever wise, visited me often, bringing stories and advice that grounded me. "You turned poison into medicine," she said, admiring my new apartment, a symbol of my independence. The turnaround was undeniable. The betrayed woman was now an example of strength, admired by colleagues and acquaintances. The fear of being vulnerable still lingered, but I embraced it, knowing that vulnerability was part of the healing. I began writing an anonymous blog about overcoming grief, sharing my journey without revealing personal details, and I received messages from grateful readers. Pedro and Carla, reduced to mere rumors, no longer held power over me. My new beginning was a hymn to resilience, proof that the past does not define the future. Each day was a victory, a step towards a life I was proudly shaping. Reflecting on my new beginning, I saw how 3 years of pain had transformed into a story of triumph. The urge to leave Pedro and Carla behind had freed me. Now I lived for myself, not to prove anything to them. The turnaround was complete. From the devastating betrayal, I was born stronger, leading at work, traveling, creating, and inspiring. The fear that once chained me was now just a memory, overcome by the confidence I had built. My mother, my biggest cheerleader, celebrated each achievement, saying, "You are proof that justice comes with patience." My new beginning was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a life without limits. Pedro and Carla, bound by their consequences, were merely footnotes in my journey. I felt free, whole, ready for any challenge. pain had shaped me, but resilience had defined me. Moral of the story. Elisangela's journey teaches us that, even in the worst betrayals, the strength to start over lies within us. Justice may be delayed, but it arrives, and overcoming is the greatest revenge. Never underestimate the power of transforming pain into purpose. Consequences always find those who deserve them. What did you think of this story? Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the Sweet Revenge US channel for more stories of drama, justice, and overcoming.